And I want to talk about the sort of decapitation, as it were, of Iran's military command and control, and what you make of that. This reminds me of what happened back in October when Hezbollah was defanged through the the operation using beepers. This is deep intelligence over months and months and months, it seems. How does Israel get a sense of where these military leaders would be so late? This is overnight Iranian time. How do they ensure they are where they want them to be in order to take them out, assassinate them with, in such a spectacular fashion? I just want to get your analysis of what happened here and how.
I think first and foremost, what we're seeing is the wider sentiment, likely among senior Iranian officials, that they may have foreseen a war with Israel, but did not take that prospect seriously. And we saw the same exact mistake being made by Hezbollah in Lebanon. And so I think the mistakes that Hezbollah made, IRGC has made. With reference to the strikes on Iranian senior military command, many of the strikes appear to have been carried out against their residences, many of which are in civilian apartment buildings in Tehran. So I don't think it's a rocket science to find out where people live. But other instances, such as the commander of the Air Force, what we're seeing is that apparently they gathered in an underground facility, and Israelis are saying that essentially they had watched his previous reactions to other instances of confrontation. And so, again, it's about, I think, not learning lessons, repeating same patterns, and it's been a big shock for them. But I think as the kind of dust settles and as there's damage assessment, and I also expect there to be many more rounds of bombings inside Iran. This, to me, is just the beginning. I think the number one question Iran needs to ask itself is, who is it at war with? Is this a war with Israel? Is this a war with the United States? And this, in turn, I think, informed next steps, such as if this is a war with Israel, that means that retaliatory options will be much more limited compared to if it is a conflict with the United States. And in that vein, there's also the question of what happens next in the diplomacy with Trump. Are we going to see any further dialogue with the United States, particularly under these conditions? Is Ayatollah Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, finally going to make the decision to weaponize the nuclear program? For instance, we have seen reports of attacks on the Natanz facility, but the lion's share of the nuclear sites are unharmed so far. The IAEA, the UN nuclear watchdog, has stated that there has been no attack on the underground Fordo capacity for enrichment, a massive enrichment site deep underground that only the United States is believed to be able to target. So again, I believe that we have to look at the question of who is Iran at war with? What will it do next in its diplomacy with the United States? And does it believe that its only remaining option is to build nuclear weapons? I think these three questions, the answers to them will determine what may come next.
Well, let me bring in Faraz at this point. I want to get your response to Mohammed's 3 points there, Firas, and to this, the Supreme Leader's statement, quote, "The regime must await severe punishment," he says, in reference, of course, to Israel. "In the enemy's attacks, a number of our commanders and scientists were martyred. Their successors and colleagues will immediately continue their mission." So I guess we should be asking at this point, how serious is that threat and what does it look like?
Yeah, Becky, it's good to be with you again. I think a good place to start would be to answer the question of who Iran is exactly at war with. Is it at war with just Israel, or is it at war with Israel and the United States? At this point, I dare to say it is still at war with Israel. President Trump all along had a preference for diplomacy. We've seen some 60 days of diplomacy. From the get-go, he's managed to hold Bibi at bay. The Israelis very much wanted to strike first, negotiate later, dismantle and destroy the entire program rather than negotiate about some level of enrichment. But clearly here we got to a point where the President of the United States decided to look the other way, give the Israeli Prime Minister the orange amber light to go ahead and conduct this operation. Iran does not have an interest in dragging the United States into this war. It can barely take on Israel of its own, let alone Israel and the United States. And therefore, Iran's reaction function will be educated by that premise. Whether it responds by closing the Straits of Hormuz or trying to affect global oil prices, attack perhaps facilities in the GCC, energy facilities, American basing or whatnot, those are the kind of reactions that will draw in the United States, particularly an American president that is very sensitive to oil prices and the impact that would have on the American and global economy. So for now, Israel is at war, Iran is at war with Israel. That can change in the days and weeks ahead, depending on how Iran reacts.
And that response, were Iran to decide it is at war with America, would drag in the Gulf region. I'm in Paris today, but obviously, you know that I'm normally based in Abu Dhabi, and there is much concern around the region about what happens next, because those American bases, of course, are primarily around the Gulf region. Now, what we do know, because you and I have talked about this over the months, is that the Iranians have much better relations with the likes of Riyadh, for example. Abu Dhabi these days always retain good relations with Doha. So what do you expect, what do you understand to be going on behind the scenes with regard messaging from these Gulf capital cities to Tehran very specifically?
Well, Becky, you're out of place today. You're in Paris instead of Abu Dhabi. I'm also not in DC. I am in Beirut, and I can tell you there's a great deal of anxiety, excitement amongst some, maybe those who are obviously opponents of Hezbollah, but a great deal of anxiety as to where the region might be going next. We spoke about Iran's reaction function, possible responses against GCC sites. Obviously, we also ought to talk about Iran's forward defense strategy, essentially the proxy network of which Hezbollah in Lebanon is part, but also the Houthis in Yemen, the militias in Iraq, whether they will come into play. That has a lot of people around the region concerned. Now, as to the GCC, those countries have for quite some time been hedging by normalizing relations with Iran. Also, a landmark visit by the Saudi Defense Minister Khalid bin Salman, the Crown Prince's full brother, to Iran back in mid-April, meeting with the Supreme Leader, essentially providing assurances, the kind of assurances and political posture that would keep these countries, Saudi Arabia, other GCC countries, out of this war. These are countries that are status quo powers. They have their national visions about growing and diversifying their economy. They very much want to be on the diplomatic side of the ledger here as diplomacy begins to unfold to try and get off the war footing. And in that sense, we know that the Saudi foreign minister in particular, Prince Faisal bin Farhan, has been in regular contact with his Iranian counterpart, being debriefed after every round of diplomacy. We've had 5 rounds of diplomacy between Iran and the United States, receiving phone calls from the Iranian foreign minister, and even speaking to the Iranian foreign minister after these Israeli strikes have commenced. So the role of the GCC here, Saudis in particular, but also the UAE, Qatar, and others, is to try and provide the diplomatic off-ramp to go back to diplomacy once, in fact, the parties involved are ready to do so.